Welcome to An Evening with Nick Dunhill, who is our resident expert when it comes to adapting or scratch building locomotives. If anyone has any specific requests, please let us know via chat so Nick can cover these too. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, James. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my lair. Sorry about all the lighting and things. Tonight, I think we're hoping, or I'm certainly hoping, to conclude the build of the Hull Barnsley loco that I've been building, I don't know, for about 3 years now, haven't I, in bits and pieces. And it's kind of morphed into a charity build as well. Let me put my webcam on that's above my bench, and then I'll give you a close look at the loco. Right. So this is my workbench. This is unfortunately all back to front, but the loco build has become a build that I'm doing for charity. Someone's having the loco when it's finished and is going to make a substantial donation to Village Water, which is quite a good charity that provides safe drinking water and sanitation in the third world. It's a charity that's really worth supporting and is supported by the fella who's taking over the loco when it's finished. Also, lots of people have got involved in, this is the loco, by the way, it's just here. Lots of people have donated parts for the loco. There are lots of people that I'm sure you've heard of that are well-known traders. The Mick Davis, who is part of the Finney 7 Co-ops, donated the 3D prints for the loco free of charge. Diane Carney did the etching of the nameplate. Laurie Griffin provided, would you believe, at cost, a set of amazing inside motion castings that you can see there underneath the loco, all installed, all working nicely. They won't rotate now because the motor's actually attached just there. We have Model Yard in Leeds, who supplied a decoder for it, and by association Brian Robertson, who donated a sound project for it as well. And then there are others as well. There's a fellow called Mike Hopkins who trades as Scale Factor, and he's provided a load of castings for the cab, which we'll come to in a minute. And then I'm hoping we're going to be able to move the project on after we finish the loco, maybe take a break for a month or 6, and build a tender for the loco. I've got some drawings here for the tender, and a chap called Russell Burridge has been developing etchers for Hull Barnsley locos, and has very kindly donated a set of etchers for a Hull Barnsley tender. And whilst it's not exactly the one for this loco, it does bear a resemblance, and the chassis and I think parts of the footplate are the same as this loco would have had. This loco, of course, would have had a Bayer Peacock version of a Hull Barnsley tender. And Phil Atkinson at Hobby Holidays has kindly donated a set of wheels for the tender as well, which is absolutely amazing. So perhaps when we finish building the finishing off the backhead in the loco tonight, we could have an open discussion about it's in the spirit, whether it would be in the spirit of scratch building, to finish this loco, adapting some etchers that have been donated, or whether I should perhaps just continue and finish the loco as a pure scratch build. But perhaps we can discuss that a little bit later. Anywho, so the loco's basically finished. I mean, everything's installed. The body's finished. I think while I've been off air, well, I don't think I did this I think I might have done this to show. I installed this part here, which is it's kind of a cover for the reverser. The loco has a reverser just inside the cab, just behind there, a reversing handle that and the screw thread for it kind of sticks out into this sort of housing here. And this is the reversing shaft that sort of pops in there. And you can see that if you encourage it, will actually go into the return crank just there. So that bit of the loco's finished. And that really just left the backhead. Those of you that attend guild shows will have seen me at, I think it was at the Wigan show last year. I scratch built a backhead. Now this is just quite simply made from a keyhole shaped piece of brass onto which I've sort of embossed 1,000 dings that are meant to represent the sort of stays that go through the firebox. And then Mike Hopkins, who I mentioned a minute or two ago, got in touch because he'd seen me doing this, and he remembered that a few years ago he and I collaborated building a Sterling single for someone, and the designer or the chief engineer of the Hull Barnsley at the time when this loco was running, or I can't remember whether it was designed by Sterling's son or whether it was his brother, I can't even remember. But anyway, they had a common family connection between the Hull Barnsley and the Great Northern. And when you look at the drawings, it's pretty evident. Mike pointed out that the backhead on this Hull Barnsley loco looks like it had fittings that were identical to the ones that we used on a Sterling single. So Mike, being a nice bloke, he turned up at one of the shows with a great big bag of castings here, look, for all the things that I would need for the backhead based on the drawing that I emailed to him, and he was incredibly kind. And it had the fire roll door there, and it had the regulator handle, and then a blower valve there, and then he didn't really know. I think that originally this loco would have had the injectors behind the back here of the steps, but when the loco was modified sometime around the turn of the last but one century, they were moved onto the backhead, and they had this sort of kind of this kind of backhead look that appeared on the backhead, and the ones behind the steps were removed. I think at some point this loco had Westinghouse equipment as well, but that had been removed in this era as well. Anyway, Mike, I mean, what a superstar. He donated all these parts. So I've got injectors, I've got a combined sort of steam brake and vacuum brake handle for it. I have he sent a selection of the sort of fittings for the water gauges. He sent me some that were designed on the very, very, very early locos without the safety boxes around them, the glass boxes, and some with fittings around which I could fit. So I've got alternatives for either the safety valve, the safety box type, or the open type. Luckily for the people that worked on this loco, this one had safety glasses around the water valve. So of course, when it burst, it didn't get showered with boiling water at high pressure, which I'm sure you wouldn't want. So to get the sort of the whole thing rolling, you can see what I've done is I cut out the castings for the fire hole door and attached those to the backhead that I'd made. And I found in my scrap box a sort of a leftover shelf, so I've soldered that on. And also this is the blower valve. I think it's the blower valve in the middle of the backhead, just below the stuffing box. I think it is. Yeah, we're working from this drawing here. And this drawing's a little bit ambiguous in that it does show injectors here and here, but if you look at the photographs, the ones here behind the step, as I said earlier, have gone. So I assume that it has this type that are on the backhead. I think there's a bit of freelancing going on here with the backhead. I'm sure it's based on a photograph of some sort, but in the absence of better source material, we'll just have to run with what it says here. Anyway, to get things rolling, you can see I did cut out the regulator, and that's kind of been soldered there. So the fire roll door's been soldered here, and the regulator there, and the blower valve there onto the back of the backhead. because of course all those items will be painted black by hopefully Warren, when I persuade him it'd be a really nice thing to do to paint this thing for free. So when I send things to Warren, I always send them with the backhead separate from the loco. If it'll come out, I always take it out of the cab and then glue it in later. And I always try to make the fittings so they are loose, so they'll come off the backhead, so that when it's been painted, they can go back on, and then they'll be in the metallic finish. You know, they'll be in the brass finish of the castings, and they'll be in the copper finish of the pipework and any other sort of fancy metals that we may or may not use while we're building it. So if you want to see some soldering, hang around, because I think that what I'm going to do now is start soldering the backhead fittings together. You'll see in a minute I've secretly done some of them, but let's turn the soldering iron on and get started. Right. So firstly, what I always do is mark out the positions of everything on the backhead, and I've taken the dimensions off this drawing again, and you can see I've sort of pre-drilled holes for the brake handle. These are big holes for the injectors, and then there are two smaller holes that you can see there that are for the water valve. Now, usually the water valve castings come with a sort of a mounting spigot at the top and at the bottom, but I always cut the one off the bottom because it makes it much easier if you don't have to get two holes that are exactly vertical and at exactly the same distance as the casting, you know, so it saves a lot of mucking around if you just cut the bottom one off, but we'll come to that in a minute. And we'll make a start with the brake handle. You can see what I've also done, well, you probably won't be able to see, is that I've pre-drilled all the holes. I usually, if I can get a drill in, I usually drill all the holes while these castings are still on the sprue. And you just have to kind of hold them in your hand, or sometimes if I'm not feeling quite so brave, I use a jeweler's ring clamp, you know, it's like a wooden hand clamp to clamp the castings in, so I can drill them without fear of drilling through my hand. So looking at the drawing here, it looks like there are two pipes coming out of the bottom of this handle and one coming out the top. And the one coming out the top takes a feed from the injector. So if we start by putting on these two pipes here on the bottom, we'll start there. So I've got what's left of a reel of copper wire here. And I'll chop myself a piece that's approximately the right length. And now I've done that, we'll just chop the very ends off where they've been distorted by the wire cutters. And here's a trick for straightening out a bit of wire that you've just taken off a roll. If you get a block of metal, this is just a lump of aluminium, and you get another bit of metal, which is also aluminium, and you roll the bit of wire, copper wire, between them. It straightens them up really nicely, look. And so this
what diameter wire is that, Nick?
Well, this is 0.9 mil. I was just going to say that. This is 0.9 mil wire, and that's for this run of pipe here. Mm-hmm. So if we shove that in the bottom of the brake there, I'll tell you what, we'll put a bit of a taper on here so it goes in. Just file a taper on the end of that. Pop that in there, and I'll hold it like so. And we'll put a bit of flux on it. We'll solder that in place. Now, I'd kind of like to touch the solder at the back of the wire where you won't be able to see it. So if any solder does migrate down the pipe, then you won't see it. Now, this wire, this piece of pipe, looks like it's got a kink in it. So if we hold that up against the drawing, we can put an appropriate kink in it using a pair of pliers like that. There we go. So that's wire number 1. Sorry, pipe run number 1. Just give that a bit more of a tweak, make it a bit more apparent. That looks okay. So we'll move on to the next one. Now, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking to myself, well, I have 0.4 and 0.6 millimeter diameter wire in my stash here. So I'm willing to bet that that's close, so close to 0.6 that you'll not get a better measurement by trying to measure it off the drawing. So take a piece of 0.6 wire. You don't really have to do the rolling trick to make this straight. If you just keep smoothing it between your fingers, look, it straightens itself out quite nicely because it's so thin, and we need about that much of it. So we'll solder that in that little fitting there. That's just at the side of the 0.9 mil wire we've just done. If we hold that, we can solder that on the back. Like that. There we go. So that's the first 2 bits of oh, some nuts falling off. Look, refused to go on. Let's have another go. You need to be careful when you're buying wire from stock, because a lot of this copper wire comes with a resin coating on it, because the manufacturers assume that you're going to use it in an electrical winding. So it's always a good idea to buy the pure copper wire. I think it's a lot more difficult to find though. Again, looking at the drawing, it looks to me as if this smaller diameter pipe follows the kink in that one. So there we go. Put that in with a pair of tweezers. And that sits in that hole there, look, on the backhead. And I would say that that kink isn't quite far enough. But we won't be able to tell unless we put the backhead into the loco and try it. So there's the loco. And I would say that that probably does clear it, actually. Let's put the wire to length. Just pop that in there. We can turn it upside down and get me shears. Just go.
I think your camera's moved a bit, Nick.
So it has.
That's better.
So we've snipped the bottom off the wires and we'll just tidy them up with my rotary sander and pop those back on there. And we'll just offer this all up back into the loco. So just move you around a bit so you can see. And we'll put the backhead there, and it needs a bigger kink in it. So let's take that out. This is all an iterative process. And of course, you have to remember that the drawing isn't a model of a fine scale loco, so the frames are closer together. So actually, these sandboxes here are slightly wider on the model than they would be on the real thing, and hence we need to kink this a little bit more. So I think we'll do that with a pair of pliers. Am I casting too much of a shadow? Is it better if I put the lamp there? Can you see better?
I think that's better. Yeah, it's better.
So we'll do that. Straighten that one out. And I'll put a kink there. And then we'll hold this one to follow it. Like so. I mean, you try to be quite neat with these, but of course on the real loco, well, probably not so much in Hull and Barnsley days, but certainly later in their BR era, these pipes were all over the place, especially on a humble goods engine like this one. Well, it probably wasn't an humble goods engine, was it, when it was first in service? It was probably pulling fast passengers between Barnsley and Sheffield, or Barnsley and Hull, or something like that. Any road. Let's have another go. See if that's better. Move this way a little bit so you can see what I'm trying to finagle. Putting that in there. Putting that in there again. There we go. Look at that. Drops into place nicely. Right. We'll crack on with that. We'll call that a win. And we'll move on. And you can see that there's a... Oh, smooth your back. There we go. You can see that there's a pipe that comes out of the top of the brake fitting there and goes into the top of the injector. So I tell you what we'll do. I think we'll cut another piece of wire and put that piece in, or put something in that will become that piece now first. And then in due course, we'll, when we put the pipes on the injector, we'll muck about and make this piece of pipe join the two components together. So we'll pop that in there. And we'll solder this piece of random copper pipe in there, like that. Lovely. Again, soldering on the back of the fitting so that so the brake doobie's going to go something like that. And this is the injector, and I've done the same thing with the injector casting. I've pre-drilled the two holes at the bottom for the feed water pipe and the pipe. I don't know what that pipe carries actually. One probably carries the steam, doesn't it, and one the feed water, and then the water goes through the back of the injector straight into the boiler, unless anybody knows how it really works, and I'd be interested to hear. So that's going to go approximately there. So we can see that we need to put a bend in this pipe about there. So something like that. And of course you end up finagling these a million times until you get them absolutely right. And then that needs to be bent somewhere around there. I mean, this is quite a tedious process, as you can see. This just takes a whole day to put the fittings on a backhead, because you just end up constantly moving and altering and moving and altering. You can see I've bent that in nowhere near the right place, so we'll try and straighten it a bit. There we go. And we'll have another go at bending it. So where we are there. And well, I think that's probably going to go more or less where I want it to go. So we'll put that there for now. And we'll look at putting the pipes on the bottom of the injector. So the injectors have got two pipes, one behind the other. You can't see the other one on the drawing because it's behind it, but it does have two. So again, we'll measure put ourselves a bit of copper wire that's approximately the right length, and then another one. And then we'll get the magic block, straighten it best we can by eye, and then we'll roll the two lengths. So I see it straightens it really nicely, doesn't it? There's a trick for you. Only works with short. Well, it works with quite long bits of pipe, obviously, if you've got a very long block of metal. But again, we'll put a bit of a taper on that. And we'll put that in the front there. We're not going to be able to solder the back of this one because there's a bit of casting behind it, so we'll have to be super careful with the flux. And only put a very small dab of solder on the end of my soldering iron and hit it there. Ooch. I can report that copper does conduct heat very quickly. So if you linger too long with your iron, you're going to get burned. And there's the second pipe. There we go. It's landed in the hole that I've pre-drilled in the bottom of the casting. When I'm drilling these holes, I always use my best drills as well, because there's nothing worse than breaking a drill off in a casting, and often that's the end of the casting, really, because it's almost impossible to dig the tip of the bloody drill out of the casting without completely trashing it. So I suggest when you buy drills that you go and buy, the quite expensive ones. Don't buy the cheap carbon ones. Go and buy high-speed steel ones. I know they're a little bit more expensive, but A, they last longer, and B, there's much less chance that you're going to snap them off in an expensive casting. Now, I know that that's got a kink in it to take the run of pipe close to the backhead, and what I'm doing here is just checking that the fitting, that the back of the pipe sits on or near to the backhead, and the fitting is sort of parallel. You can see, well, that's a pretty good fit. We'll put the other kink in. Of course, we have to put that kink in first, then that one, and hope that I've guessed it's in the right place. There we go. Okay. Take that as a win as well. So that's that. And if I flip this upside down, again, I can go at it with my shears and just snip the excess off the bottom there. Boom. And just neaten the ends of the pipe up with the chattering rotary sander. Time for a new mini drill, I think. Although I've been saying that for years. And I've never got one because most mini drills now have a keyless chuck, and for some reason I have a bit of a keyless chuck phobia. So I quite like a chuck that's got but I'm sure it's just a ridiculous sort of phobia on my part. I'm sure that most chuckless keys are fine, and if anybody has one that they could recommend, I'd be really pleased. Right, so we're offering this up now, look, to see whether this pipe falls in the right place, and it doesn't quite. So we will just tweak it a little bit more to make that kind of run of pipe. Offer that up and see if we're in the right ballpark area. We'll put that injector in its hole. We'll put that one in its hole, and where am I? Am I close? Oh, I am. So I think I need to snip it off the U shape I've just done about there. And we'll offer that up as well. And it needs a bit more snipping off. So we'll take another 0.5 millimeter off it. And we'll keep going till the hockey stick bit of pipe lands in the top of the injector. But there. So that's where I want it to go. And it doesn't quite go there yet. I think my pipe's still a little bit too long. Do a bit more snipping, another mil. getting close now, so I'm going to file the burr off that the shears have left, so that it will go in the hole now that's in the top of the injector casting. Strange, this modelling to my own voice, because usually I have somebody like Rory Stewart or Alistair Campbell for company while I'm doing this kind of thing. Emily Maitlis, all that kind of centrist dad's podcast sort of stuff. Tweak that a little bit. I mean, the aim here is to have all of these pieces of castings and pipework come out in one piece, and then they can be sort of slotted back in when. Now, you know what? I'm not a million miles away there. But then when the thing's been painted, I can just pop the pieces of pipework and fittings straight back into the holes. And that way, as I said before, you do get a nice backhead that's got all of the fittings in their metallic state rather than loads of overspray. But it is a bit of a ball ache. Because of course they end up tarnishing, inevitably they end up tarnishing, don't they? Do you know what? It's still not right, that is it? It's still a million miles away. Well, it's about a millimetre away, isn't it?
I just wondered, have you considered painting the backhead, the basic backhead first before you attach anything?
No, I always make all these parts and then send the bits that need painting away. I don't send the pipework or anything. I'll just keep them. What I do is I take a photograph of the finished backhead so I know how it goes together. Because by the time this comes back from the painters, I'll have made two more. So you can never remember where anything goes. So it's always a good idea. In fact, it's a good idea to have a blog like this of how you've done it, because you can always refer to the blog, can't you? Go back and refer to how you did it in the first place. See, we're not a million miles away, but I'm going to take another little tiny cut off this pipe.
One of the things I've done recently is build the backhead for the Battle of Britain loco that I'm putting together.
Yeah.
And there's so much pipe work and fittings on that. There's no real way you could ever assemble them and put them on afterwards.
I don't know. I did a Royal Scot for somebody.
Yeah.
End of last year, and that had so much pipe work on it, and it didn't all come off in one piece, but it came off in 3 or 4 or 5 different layers.
Right.
And again, I had to take loads of photographs of how I'd assembled it, because I knew I'd forget.
Yeah.
And I did, I had to refer to the photographs when I was putting it together. There we go. Now then, I think we're about right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dab that on there. Solder the two sub-assemblies together, and then I can do any final tweaking that I need to do. There we go. So I think that isn't too bad. So that's as we've got there on the drawing, that's the brake handle, and that's the injector for on the right hand side of the loco. And as if by magic, look, I'd already done the one on the other side. You cheat. He's cheated us, look. Anyway, there we go. So that's a big chunk of the backhead done. We'll do a water gauge now, because I've got this sort of fancy way of doing the boxes that go around the water gauge, the sort of glass safety boxes. And I've already made one. So if I pop that on the backhead, I'll show you how I made the other. You can see, look, it's 2 fittings, 2 castings, and then a piece of perspex in between them. Can you see that? Can you see that? There's a piece of perspex to represent the transparent glass box. That fits there like so, look. Except that, yes, it does, look, it drops nicely there, look, onto the backhead. So these I make in a variety of ways. If you go and buy, often if you go and buy these water gauge castings, what you usually get is a cast square in the middle, a rectangular box to represent the water, the safety glass box thing round the bit of pipe. But I saw this. I can't claim that this is my idea because it isn't. It was actually Jeff Holt. Was it Jeff Holt or Tony Reynolds? You know, one of those old blokes. That I spotted doing this. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. So what this tiny thing is here in my hand is a piece of perspex, square perspex rod, and I've got. Well, I'd say I've got miles of it, but really I haven't. I've got about 8 inches of it left, which I'm sure will see me through. So what I do is get a piece of rod. You can see I've got about 6 inch piece there, and I always try to drill a hole down the middle of it to represent the water tube. And the way I do that is to get a nice new 0.7mm drill and shove it in a pin chuck like so. Although my pin chuck's getting a bit overused at the moment, and it won't take the really small drill. No, it's got this one. Excuse me, I've had a cold for weeks. Can't shake the bloody thing off. So what I try to do is try to drill a hole down the middle of this bit of square rod. I mean the rod's about 1.5 mil square or something like that. Let's have a quick measure. Rob Cullen sells it actually. He's got tons of it. It's 1.8 square. So that's going to be an imperial size, isn't it? It's going to be so many 32ths or 64ths or whatever it is. All those daft imperial measurements are in. And I always kind of lick the back of my hand, which is a bit disgusting, really, isn't it? And as lubrication. And then get the drill started in the top of the perspex. Once you've got a pip, you can kind of finagle the drill around a little bit at an angle until you've got it in the middle. And then if you look at I'm sure if I were a proper engineer, I would have this in a fitting or something so the drill was perfectly vertical. But really what I do is I cheat. I sort of keep turning the perspex and lining it up with the drill. And then after you've, cut for a short while into the top of the perspex rod, you can only go, the drill takes off a life of its own and it'll go in the direction that you sort of set it off in. And of course, because you're drilling a plastic, you have to keep stopping and cleaning all the swarf out of the flutes of the drill, and then of course putting a bit more spit on your drill, and then keep going. And it takes a couple of minutes to drill through. And then of course you need to measure off the drawing how much you need to cut off this. And of course, being a good Blue Peter watcher, sorry, all those from overseas, I've pre-cut one that's the same size as that, the one on the other doobie-doo. And I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this because of my webcam, but the fitting here got a tiny brass tag cast onto it that goes inside the hole I've just drilled in the perspex tube. So you've got a nice little see-through fitting there. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do before I do this is I'm going to snip off a bit of the brass. I don't want it to be quite that long. And then I'm going to get some of my best quality 99p super glue from up the street. And squeeze some out onto this bit of old card. And dip my fitting in it. Like so. And glue the perspex rod. A bit more gob out. There we go. There we go. Ooh, shit, dropped it. And then sort of try and line it up by eye. So it's kind of vertical and square on. I'm happy with that, so we'll go with the other one. Now we can see this one's got an even longer brass bit of wire there, look, sort of cast onto it. So I'm going to cut that quite a bit shorter as well. And so nip offer it up, see if it fits. It does. So we'll dip that in the not expensive super glue and stick that to the top. Oh, bugger, dropped it. It's fallen apart. Let's have another go. It's so small. There we go. Hopefully hold that for a couple of seconds. There we go. Got it. There we go. So that's kind of how I make them using these fittings that I got off Mike Hopkins. Now, excuse me, often I use those Laurie Griffin ones. Laurie Griffin sells cast ones, and usually they've got sprues on here and here, holding them onto another sprue. So what you can do with those is cut the brass square rectangular gauge glass thing off it while it's while the fittings are still on the sprue, and then you can cut out a piece of perspex as I've just described and glue it between the two end valves while it's on the sprue. And if you're really careful with your piercing saw when you're cutting the completed fitting off the sprue, you can actually do it without breaking the glue. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you can. And I said that I was going to take off that pip there, look, and I've left it on, which was a bit bad of me, but we'll take it off with some wire cutters like that. And he says desperately trying not to put any sort of file the rest of that off with a rotary sander, like so. There we go. And then, of course, these safety boxes, they always have a piece of card or something at the back of them that's got chevrons painted onto it, so that you can actually see where the water is inside the tube. So what I've done is I've just flicked it and it's disappeared now on my workbench. I have this piece of paper here, look, can you see? I don't know whether you can see that under my webcam, but it's kind of chevrons, can you see? They're just downloaded off the internet and printed out. And what I do is I just cut strips of that and glue it onto the back of the perspex box, and it kind of gives you the impression of chevrons there, look, behind the water, the glass safety box. So there's a little paper strip of chevrons. I was trying not to sneeze or anything or cough now. And if I get a cocktail stick and just dab it in my super glue and just put a tiny dab at the top of the bottom on the back of this water gauge, then I can get my chevron. Where's my chevron gone? Oh no, it's disappeared.
Under the wheel, where your finger was just then. It's on top of the writing, I think, by the word class.
Oh, it is. Gotcha. I can see it. Thank you. And I'll stick that on the back like so. And you have a nice sort of chevron on the back of the... So when you look at it from that side, you can see it's kind of got zigzags on it. I'm just going to peel that off though and put it on in the middle, so at the moment it's sort of slightly off to one side. Come on, you bugger. I'll tell you what, let's leave it on because I'll just tear it if I get too vicious with it. Right, so this needs a bit of copper wire soldering in the bottom for the drain pipe, and you can see I've got one that I prepared earlier. And it's got a burr on that end. That's very difficult to get rid of the burrs off these pieces of wire because they just bend if you hit them with a file. There we go. I don't know what it's doing in the south of England, but it started to rain here. That's bizarre, isn't it? Pay more council tax. There we go. You in the pre-drilled hole? Yes, you are. Try not to solder myself to it. Oh God, this is so small. There we go. Looks reclined. Down the solder. There we go. Ta-da! Oh, time to go there. So that goes in there, like so. And we need to bend the piece of wood pipe, and I can see on the other one that we need to bend it right at the bottom. So keep your fingers crossed that the soldered joint doesn't fracture. Needs to go down behind the back of that handle as well. And we need to go down, then out, like so. There we go. And that should drop into the hole there. Come on, I know you'll go in there because I drilled you to match. There we go. And that needs bending it there. Take me to the bottom of the backhead. Like that. I can see it's got a big burr on it, the top one there. Let's raise that off, and I think will be good. So there we go. That is our complete backhead. Ta-da! Very good. Always a bit of relief when it's done. And we'll turn that upside down and get that off. Right. So I think that is more or less done. Tidy it up for the sake of social media. Needs a bit of a finagle there, a bit of a twist. A bit of a twist there. A bit of a twist there. There we go. That's our backhead. Finished. Hurrah! Now, I think on a real loco, I'm not sure because I'm not really familiar with real locos. Where do these pipes go? I assume that the planking on the cab floor kind of stops and the pipe goes through a hole in the bottom of the cab floor. Is that right? Anybody that's got any experience of this kind of thing?
Yeah, they do. But generally, I mean, some of the pipes
Do they
some
have
of the
cover
pipe,
plate?
some of the pipes will wrap round the sides of the backhead. It all depends on where they're going and where they've come from.
Right, I see.
But the bigger pipes that you've looked at there, they will go through the floor.
Right, right.
Um,
Because what I always assume every loco I've seen's got kind of a it's got kind of a wooden floor and it's got kind of a bit of
yeah.
plate, hasn't it, in front of the fire roll door, and I assume that that's to stop you setting fire to the planking with anything that falls out of the fire. Would that be a fair assumption, do you think?
I would have thought that was pretty fair. Yeah.
And
Um,
I
I
don't know
mean,
about all locos, but certainly on some of them, this piece that goes here on the floor, that
mm,
usually has a bit of an upstand on the end of it, which I couldn't see any evidence of in any of the drawings or anything like that of this loco. So
mm,
I sort of um, I sort of left it off because. But the point I'm trying to make is if I were to put an upstand on here, it kind of disguises the fact that the pipes just kind of stop. But also, what I've done, if you look, is I've put the cab floor on. This is sort of to represent the planking on the cab floor.
mm,
Um, and it's just made out of thin, very thin plasticard sheet. I used to actually make it out of bits of veneer, and Warren got really upset with me. Warren's the painter, for those of you that don't know, and he got a bit upset about it because although the veneer did look a little bit nicer than the plastic, it soaked up a lot of paint, and
mm,
also when it soaked up a lot of paint, sometimes it would warp. So I kind of gave up on that idea, even though it did look nicer. But and started using perspex instead. Um, but anyway, that's another story. And I think actually what you get then is you get the sort of level of the planks, and then it drops down, doesn't it, at the back of the planks, and there's kind of a trough, if you like, that all the pipe work goes into in on the back end of the loco. Anyway, that's the back end finished. Um,
mm.
now that was remarkably quick for me, but you can see I had part built it anyway. Um,
So is that bar, that horizontal bar across the top, is that the regulator?
yeah, it's a regulator. It's a very similar regulator to the type that you would get on a Great Northern loco, something like a Sterling single. They're
Okay.
almost identical to that.
So
Uh,
is that can be operated from either side?
I think so. Yeah,
It looks it, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. Um, I don't really know anything about it. Now, other things I've made for the cab are here. Look in this little box. That's a sort of a jack that just sits there on the. You can't see that. It's gone off out of shot, hasn't it? It just sort of goes there. Look in between the splashes on one side of the loco. Obviously, when you see pictures of the loco, that moves around. Um, I made a reversing. There was nothing commercially available for this, but as luck would have it, in my box of bits, there was this really quite nice casting for a wheel. And if you kind of offer it, oh no, no, I lie. Mike Hopkins drew that and 3D printed it, as he did all these fittings. They're drawn in CAD and printed as waxes and then 3D printed. He gets them done in a foundry somewhere in Fife. I think Shapeways have closed now, haven't they?
Yeah.
Shapeways were in the Netherlands, weren't they? There's
Yeah.
some from the Netherlands here tonight, isn't there? And
Hmm.
then we didn't really know what the upstand was that supported the wheel, so I just made this is kind of completely freelanced, and it's as you can see, look, it's a piece of tube that supports the um, sort of screw thread there, the scroll thread that's on the hand wheel, and then a
Mm.
vertical piece, and then a horizontal piece. So it's just three pieces of nickel silver and a bit of brass, two pieces of nickel silver and a bit of brass rod that are soldered together and then shaped up with me rotary sander. And they sit quite nicely. Can't really show you this because it's all the wrong orientation. I need gravity to be working from the side of the shot, don't I? It kind of fits like that. I don't know whether you can see that. You can
Right.
to get an essence of it, can't you, from the webcam? This is all Droidcam's fault for not working, because my mobile phone would have worked a lot better, you see. So that kind of fits like that there, somewhere like that. And the end of the scrolly shaft thing comes out there into that. Oh, you can't see that there. Look into that sort of lozenge fitting that's on the side of the loco. And then I made this. I mean, I don't really know whether this is, again, this is just freelance, and this is it's a kind of a handle that you might use for the I don't know, the cylinder drain cocks or something like that, because I did notice on the picture of these locos that they had a control rod that sort of, can you see the, here we go, if you look on the photographs, there's a control rod that you've got a mechanism here, look, for the cylinder drain cocks. They work off the sort of valves on the bottom. And you can see there's a control rod here that just randomly disappears. And if you look at the photographs, you can actually see that control rod there. And then it's got a sort of a vertical reach rod that goes up here. And then it kind of disappears behind the boiler clothing. So I'm guessing it goes between the firebox and the boiler clothing into the cab, and it reappears in the cab. And I've actually put it on this loco. It's just, can you see? It's just there. Look, that's the reach rod that these are all the pull rods. Look, that control the cylinder drain cocks. Can you see that? They're just there. Look, and then they're connected by this shaft to one on one side that goes down the side of the chassis, and there's another reach rod that disappears off between the boiler clothing and the boiler, and it reappears here in the cab. So this is designed to sort of go something like that on the side of the sandbox, so that the driver's got something to operate the cylinder drain cocks when you're setting off. That's utter freelance, that. There's no suggestion of it at all. And then I've made, this is Mike also did some castings for gauge faces, sorry, for gauges. And what I've done is, in the past, I've got this kind of library, as well as these chevrons for the backs of the glass, the gauge glass, safety glass thingy. I've also downloaded a load of can you see, sort of gauge faces and things like that in all different sizes, and they're just printed out on bits of paper, and then you can find one that's close, and you can cut it out and sort of stick it on your cast gauges. You can see there, look, I've got all kinds of, they're tiny, they're actually Westinghouse ones with two handles on them. And then you can see here I've got some ancient Great Western Railway Victorian ones, but there's only one left, and something else, and so on. And there's some British Rail Speedo gauge faces, and so it goes, and so it goes. And they're just things that you kind of acquire down the years, and you can usually just rip them off Google Images. You know, if you Google a pressure gauge, you quite often on Google Images get loads of photographs of a gauge face or something like that, and you can just sort of download them and put them in, I don't know, you can even manipulate them in something like Word. If you can use something like snipping tool to grab them off the internet and then manipulate them, in even a very basic package. Corel Draw, I suppose, would make a very good thing. And this gauge sort of goes, I'll kind of go like that, because this is the smaller one's the one that goes to the brake. So it's got a bit of pipe that heads down there somewhere near the brake fitting. And then I made another one here, look, that sort of goes into the top nut there on the water gauge, because often on these old locos, the boiler pressure gauge is connected onto the top valve on the water gauge, because obviously it's just that boiler pressure, isn't it? And then there's this little thing that Mike cast as well, which is it kind of goes something like that, and that's a fitting that isn't shown on this drawing, but on the Stirling single, it's a kind of a valve that is operated by the some kind of lever that works the whistle on the loco. You can see the whistle on the loco is kind of there, look, and it sits on this turret here on the top of the firebox, and there's a pipe that goes into the cab there, off the back of the whistle mount just here, and this fitting that Mike made connects up to it, and it's got a little lever on it that you can use for blowing the whistle. And he kind of, because the Stirling single had one, he just copied the one that was on the Stirling single. Because the same designers, the regulator handles the same, and the injectors are the same, and this is a pretty standard sort of vacuum and steam combined handle thing. And so anyway, that was another piece of guesswork. And the cabs always have, because the driving wheel here is inside the center of it's inside the cab, you can also assume that there's going to be some kind of a drip feed oil box like that inside the cab that has probably got something like 3 feeds, and 2 will go down to the left and right horn cheek, and the middle one will probably feed the axle box itself. I mean, on later locos, more modern locos, the axle box itself is usually pressure fed. That's often where the outlets from the mechanical lubricators on the footplate would, they'll all head off towards the driving wheel axle boxes to keep them well oiled. So that's kind of everything I thought that we needed for the backhead, really. So that's that finished, and of course everything just comes off, look, and leaves you with a bare backhead. So Awood can paint it, and then when it comes back from the paint, you just kind of glue it all back on, and everything looks lovely. But you do have to take a little bit of time at this stage, to make all the fittings individually.
So do you super glue them on?
Yeah,
painted?
I do. I mean, sometimes I'll turn it upside down and just put a dab of, I don't know, very low melt solder on the back,
Okay.
70-degree solder, because often Warren doesn't paint the back of the backheads. When you turn them over, they're still bare metal. And if he does that, he's doing you a favour, because you can just put a dab of solder, can't you, on the location pins on the back of all these fittings, and everything's lovely. So yes, there we are. I think that's the loco finished, isn't it? We can sign that off now. We can sign that to jobs done. Which brings us to the thorny question of the tender. I don't know whether anybody has an opinion on this. Because really, I'm kind of selling this as a scratch build that I'm doing for charity, aren't I? And I'm kind of changing the objectives a little bit, aren't I? I'll show you anyway. I don't know whether Russell Burridge is in the audience.
No, he isn't. The last I heard, unfortunately, Russell's in hospital at the moment.
Oh no.
In France, which is where he lives.
I know he lives in France, yeah, because they all came in a box with French stamps and stuff on it.
And I actually just messaged him to see whether how he's doing at the moment, but I haven't had a response.
Right. Well, he was really kind. I mean, what a top man. He sent me all this.
Well, he's designed a Hull Barnsley locomotive complete kit.
Yeah.
Pretty much for his own benefit. Yeah. I don't think he was planning to sell it.
And look, he's just sent me this, and it's just an amazing set of etchers for building a Hull Barnsley tender. But it's not quite the right Barnsley Hull Barnsley tender, because I don't think the Hull Barnsley had works, did they? So they bought stuff in anyway, didn't they, from various contractors? And it was only a tiny railway, wasn't it? But the wheelbase is the same, and he said the side frames are pretty similar. So what do you think? Do you think it's in keeping with the spirit of scratch building if I nick some bits off these etchers?
Well, I would have thought so myself. Yeah, on the basis that this is not a commercial kit,
No.
um, then
Well, I'm still going to have to scratch build a tender body probably,
yeah.
but at least you see he's got parts here, hasn't he? Look, for a compensated chassis, and
But I think
that'd be really useful, wouldn't it, to be able to use that rather than having to scratch build one because it's hours and hours and hours of work cutting these pieces out and measuring them really carefully, you know.
yeah. No,
Um,
I personally wouldn't have a problem in the same way as you've used castings made by someone else that you
well, that's
haven't
right. I mean,
made.
it's got the loco's got Lorry Griffin castings in it, and
Yeah.
so I think
I mean,
that.
I think a scratch build to me is something that you put together obviously with some handmade parts, but you don't expect everything to be handmade. What do other people think? Do they agree?
I mean, the scratch building's kind of taking on a bit of a life of its own these days, isn't it? Because I mean, I back in the olden days. Let's go back to me looking at you in the camera because I can't reach the where's
Yeah.
the word that there it is.
Peter Dalton's comment is, I think you're talking yourself into using it. I
He's right.
agree.
Yeah. He's exactly right. No.
Um, no, I was around when Russell was designing his kit, um, and because it didn't quite fit an etch, he said to me, "Are there any parts that I needed?" And so I've added
Yeah, I
some of
mean,
my bits.
I always do this when I'm scratch building. I mean, obviously, I do it commercially, so I'm not. It's really about finishing the loco as quickly as you possibly can to keep the money down, the bill down for the client. Really, isn't
Yeah.
it? That's kind of what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
And I mean, sometimes it's actually cheaper when you're building commercially to just if you can find somebody like Mick Davis or Adrian Rowland or Jeff Ennis. Now he's kind of retired from his real job to draw you the parts. They might charge you a couple of £1,000 for one-off etchers, but it's a couple of £1,000 is literally 2 weeks' work. Now that you're never in a million years gonna be able to cut a hand measured, mark out and cut all the pieces that you would get on those etchers in a couple of weeks. So it's a massive saving in time. And of course these days it's kind of moved on scratch building, hasn't it? Because back in the old masters day, they would turn a chimney or a dome or something like that. And I don't have a lathe or a milling machine. You see, I work in a small bedroom in our house, and my wife rightly said that I couldn't bring a Myford up here. And
If you could get it upstairs.
that's right. Yeah. Well, I've had several motorbikes in the attic, including one that's up there right now. But I think bringing a lathe or a mill in the house would be taking the piss a bit, really, wouldn't it? So I don't turn chimneys, and therefore I always used to dig around Laurie Griffin's catalogue and Warren Shepherd's catalogue and so on and so on, and Ian Young, and all those people who do good castings. And of course these days you just send the drawing to Mick Davis, and then the day after tomorrow a 3D print of it will drop through your letterbox. And actually, of all the 3D prints are actually really good, especially if you get people like Mike Hopkins or Mick Davis that can actually do 3D prints that don't show the layering anymore in them. Oh yeah. Well, it does show the layering if it's a big component, but for something like a chimney or a dome, it's just not there. And once they're painted, you can't even tell they're 3D prints. So, that's kind of the way forward, really, isn't it?
Definitely.
Does it look like I've
Um,
caught the sun today? I look a bit red, don't
so do I, mate. Don't worry about
I?
it. Um, right. Has anybody got some questions
Anybody,
for Nick?
any questions? I've kind of got through the soldering bits of this demonstration a lot quicker than I thought I would, really. And usually with these things last 2 hours, don't they? But we're only on an hour and 10 minutes. So if anybody wants to pick my brain, go ahead.
And
Can I
I
ask
mean,
you, Nick? Can I
Yeah.
ask you a question? Yeah. You mentioned glue and super glue, and you also mentioned that you use cheap super glue.
I do. I'm a right cheapskate, aren't I?
Yeah, I just detest glue in all its forms, so I try to avoid glue. But what other glues would you use?
Well, I've got epoxy resin for things like soldering lead sheet inside boilers, you know, adding a bit of ballast, that kind of thing. What else would I use epoxy resin for? Soldering the balance weights onto the sides of wheels, for instance.
Right, right.
And I have to confess, I have got two types of super glue. I've got some fancy stuff over here, look, that's hideously expensive, you know, proper sort of branded Loctite stuff. And I try not to use that for sticking bits of paper on the back of perspex, you know, because it's I think super glue, if you take the lid off, the cap off too many times, it kind of starts to harden, doesn't it, inside the tube?
Yeah.
And when you're paying 15 quid for a 25 ml bottle of it, you know, you get a bit circumspect, don't you, about how much of it you use. Don't know whether you should keep it in the fridge like Loctite. I don't know. Should you keep it in the fridge? Our fridge has already got Loctite in it, and I think that's a bit crap given that we keep food in it as well that we actually eat. I think it's not a good idea to keep a engineering product in the fridge with your food, is it? But there we go. It's always a laugh when people find it and go, I'm looking for some lemon for me gin and tonic. Why have you got Loctite in your fridge? And he said, well, it's so you can Loctite the ice together, isn't it? Yeah. But anyway, yeah. But for things like this, I just go up the Crooks, the bit of Sheffield where I live, still got an old-fashioned ironmongery place. You know, sell you 6 screws if you want them, and 2 coach bolts. And he sells, as well as the 25 quid or 15 quid or whatever it is, a bottle stuff. He also sells you this really cheap stuff that's 99p a tube, which is perfect for soldering paper on, gluing paper onto the back of the thing. Other glues, no, I don't really have any other adhesives. I'll tell you what's handy with the expensive super glue. I saw this years ago on Pete Waterman's website, and it's called Zip Kicker, and it's an activator for fancy super glue, and I think it's used in the aircraft industry because they bond a lot of things together, don't they? They're made out of composites and things these days, and they use fancy cyanoacrylic super glue type glues. And when it's all laid and the layers are all, you know, sort of adhered together and they've all been rolled, they spray this stuff on. This stuff's called Zip Kicker, and it's just an accelerant that just makes the glue set. I can't remember what the chemical reaction is for a cyanoacrylic, which is a shame because I used to know that. But it's a polymerization process essentially, isn't it? And this activates it, and the glue dries immediately. And that's quite handy to use, you know, because you can glue things together and then hit them with some of this, and it's a bit more instant than it often is. So that's a good thing to have lying around. But other than that, I'll just use. I've got several grades of solder that I use, you know, sort of 70 degrees, 240, electrical solder, which I can't remember what the melting point of that is, and then various other bits and pieces over there in the corner there.
Have you tried the 100-degree solder?
No, I haven't. I only really ever use the 70-degree solder as sort of filler. You know, it's pretty good for filling up panel gaps, isn't it? The 70-degree.
Yeah. Well, the 100-degree is quite good because it will solder white metal to brass without having the brass having to be tinned first.
Yeah, the 70 is not so good at that, is it?
No.
It's got no strength in it at all.
Just thin the brass bits first, don't you? But it's good to use as filler, and also you can sort of move it around with the tip of your soldering iron if you put enough flux on, and it fills it'll fill a gap that's, you know, maybe 1/4 of a millimeter or something like that. And you scrape the excess out later with the tip of a scalpel, can't you, quite easily, and it does make quite a good filler. I think that's what you normally use. I mean, normally when I'm making things like this loco here, you know, the Hull Barnsley loco, it's made out of 180-degree solder, because that gives you, you know, it gives you quite a good shear force, doesn't it? It's nice and solid. He says, try not to drop it now, it's finished. How many curries and beers am I going to have to buy Warren Haywood before he paints that? For nothing. Come on, Warren, it's a charity job.
I wonder how that'll go down.
Well, it'll go down like a lead bucket, and he'll grumble and groan, but he'll do it. Because he's a nice bloke, really.
The backhead itself, you said you cut that out of brass.
Yeah.
What thickness was that?
Well, it's just scrap brass that I'd lying around. I just happened to have a piece of, somebody had done a kit that had got a huge bit of, and it's 0.45. What's that in thou? Is that 18 thou?
That's pretty thin. That looks a
Yeah.
lot thicker.
No, well, it's sorry, yeah. It's got it's sort of
Can you
got
put sides on it?
Show us again.
yeah. Well, it's here. Look, it's got the fittings on it now, hasn't it? Hang on, I'll need to switch you on to overhead cam. Give me a second. Do. Come on. There we go. It's I need to put the light on now, don't I? There we go. There we go. So it's like a keyhole shaped thing, isn't it? Like that.
Yeah,
With lots of pings on it that I've done with my embossing tool down there. And if
yeah.
you look, it's got a strip of brass that I've just soldered all the way around the edge.
Oh, is that what you've done?
Yeah.
Right.
If I can turn it upside down without everything falling off, there we go. You can see, look,
Yeah.
it's soldered and I've not cleaned the solder up on the inside, look, either.
We don't need to.
I know. So that's kind of all that is. It's just a piece of strip, look, that's just been bent around. And often what I do, in fact, I've probably put my glasses on about, so yeah, I have, look, what I've done is I've soldered a piece of, after I've soldered the strip around the perimeter of the front face, I've got a piece of this, what's left of this copper wire, look, and I've soldered it into the corner there and flooded it with solder completely so that when you're filing the radius onto the corner of
yes.
you can quite happily file through the brass and into the copper.
Yeah.
So
And that, of course, gives you plenty of space to
put the
solder
radius on.
solder the pins
Yeah, that's right.
in the back without them sticking out.
Correct.
Nice.
So that's that. That's how I made the backhead.
Right.
So you've got that, and then that sits on this piece here sits on the cab floor here, just in front of the pipework, on top of the planking, and then these two little, can you see the hockey stick shaped bits there that are sticking out the top of it? Well, they're for the dampers. They always have them on the cab floor of locos, don't they? Like a hockey stick thing that you pull up, and it just opens the damper doors, doesn't it, at the front and the back of the firebox in the ash pan. I think they run with them open, don't they? Somebody who's a driver might be able to confirm that, but they always crack the front one open a bit, don't they, to get a bit of draft going through the firebox. Is that right?
I think you'll find it depends on the engine.
Does it?
Yeah.
Right.
Some will, some won't. Very variable.
So I think, and when you kind of part making up a backhead like this, I think it's kind of handy, isn't it, to have a kind of a basic knowledge of how a loco works, because it has to have some means of checking that the boiler's full of water and then something to get the water into the boiler. So there's always injectors there, aren't there? And then, you've always got a brake, haven't you, obviously, and something to reverse it with. And then pretty much you always have dampers, don't you, for the front and the back of the firebox. So there's always a pair of those. And then you have a blower, don't you, so that you can put on when you when you're going through a chimney or through a tunnel or something like that, and you want to shut the firebox door, and so on and so on, And I think you have to think about that when you're building a backhead, and I don't know. I think it's kind of experience as well. Like I was saying about the oil pots that go inside the cab. Often if you've got pretty much always on steam locos, they've got some kind of lubrication system for the axle boxes, haven't they? And usually, experience tells me these are usually mounted on the frames, on the inside of the frames, and they have pipes coming down to the horn cheeks and one to the axle box. Then similarly, you'll have one on this thing, but this will be inside the cab, so that it's bound to be fastened to the frames, because the frames actually they pop up inside the cab on this loco, don't they? They appear here. Look, just here on the. Whether you can see that there. Look on the at the side of these seats or sandboxes or splashers. They're probably all of those things, aren't they? And I'm willing to bet if you searched around a bit, you would find that there's some also some kind of lubrication thing for the axle boxes here. I think this is probably a radial truck, isn't it? On these locos, I don't. It probably
as you
is.
say,
Almost certainly. I've built it like a radial truck anyway. So
yeah. Going back to the injectors on your backhead that you've put on.
Yeah.
How many pipes have you got going to each injector?
Well, you usually have
There's
4,
usually
don't you?
4. Yeah.
So you got the steam.
Yeah.
And the
water,
and
you've
the
got an
outlet
exhaust
into the boiler,
outlet.
and then you have an overflow, don't you?
That's it.
So maybe these should have a third pipe somewhere. I don't know where the overflow would be.
Well, it wouldn't be in the cab.
No, it almost certainly wouldn't be in the cab, would it? Do you
No.
think those injectors probably go? Do that type of injector feed water straight into the boiler through the firebox, or do they go to a clack somewhere?
Normally they go to a clack. If the injector's outside, they normally feed into a clack, which is on the side of the boiler, quite
Yeah,
often near the smoke box.
yeah. I mean, they ditched this type of injectors became unpopular, didn't they, after a
Yeah.
while? Because the drivers preferred. Well, they didn't like having an injector on the backhead, did they? You know, for obvious safety reasons. And then they moved them, didn't they? They liked then having them underneath the footplate because I'm told by drivers that they work, or firemen, that they work better when they're flooded, you know, and if they're down below the footplate, then they're usually down below the level of the water, aren't they?
Water in the
Tender or
tank.
tank.
That's it.
So they're flooded, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they say it's easier to get them going if they're flooded. Yeah.
Makes sense.
It would. And originally these locos did have ones down there, and then they moved them up onto the backhead, and
right.
for some reason, I don't know. Maybe these just work. This type work better than the old-fashioned. Maybe you know they hadn't invented. I mean, I'm building a broad gauge loco at the moment, and would you believe they have injectors that you work with a hand pump? They've got like a kind of a stirrup thing that you
Wow.
do that with. You know, can you imagine the poor old fireman having to do that as the engine's going along, pumping water into the boiler by hand? I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that, eh?
Yes.
Yeah. Bizarre. Any other questions? Nobody else?
Don't think so at the moment. Shall we bring this session to a close?
We could
It's
have
nearly it's nearly 9:30 now.
We could have an early bath, couldn't we? Nip up the
Right, I'm going to take Nick off. Where has he gone? Oh, here we are.
I'll put myself back on face cam.
Right, I've taken Nick off Spotlight now, and I can screen share something that I want to go through with you. Here we are. So I'll share this screen and we will finish off. Right. Firstly, I'd like to thank Nick very much for his talk tonight. I've certainly found it very interesting myself. And just want to tell you all about the next session, next evening which will be with Chris Warner, who will be looking at modern image in O-gauge, looking at various ready-to-run options, kits that are available, and what you can do with modern image, and also obviously, you know, everything. My og, I never know how to say that. So that's on the 26th of July. And then we've got various other sessions planned. In August, John Jones is doing 10 plug track. September, Paul Scott, Colwich Junction. October, Tony Andrews, carriage painting. And November, Nigel Payne, rail mounted gun. That should be interesting. For those of us here who are not members, if there are any listening tonight, if you join the Gajo Guild, you can enjoy quarterly gazettes, guild news, online shows and activities, and of course the guild forum and website. You can join online. This is the sort of an example of how to get to the online joining. Use the About Us menu, join online, and that'll bring you up to this page, which shows the membership rates at the moment. And of course, those include your quarterly gazette, which is, as we know, an excellent magazine. And then we have our YouTube channel, which is accessible up on the top bar of the Gajo Guild website, which has a very large number of videos, including the one that will be generated from tonight's talk. All of the Evening With videos are available on our Gajo Guild YouTube channel. And then, of course, we've got our shows. We've got Guildex coming up next in September at Stafford. That's our 2-day show. At Bingley Hall, Stafford Showground. Very nice venue. There'll be a number of layouts and, of course, all the regular traders. Okay, so thanks very much for that. Thanks very much for listening tonight. And once again, thank you, Nick, and thank you to Richard for co-hosting with me.
Thank you
And
very
look forward to seeing you all at another one of our Evening With sessions.
And thanks for sitting through the eternal hours of soldering. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, everyone, and good night.
Bye.
Good night.